We like to think of democracy as the ultimate guarantee of freedom, but give a majority enough power, and they can use the exact machinery of a free society to box in a minority, trap them, and strip away their rights. A structural flaw was engineered into the very foundation of modern democratic theory. To see how the trap was set, we have to go back to the autumn of 1749. Jean-Jacques Rousseau was 37 years old, a self-taught dropout with no real plan, walking from Paris to the fortress at Vincennes to visit his friend Denis Diderot in prison. Along the road, he read a newspaper. An essay competition caught his eye, asking whether the restoration of the sciences and arts had purified morals. The question triggered a massive physical reaction. Rousseau sat down under a tree and wept. The insight that overtook him would drive the rest of his life. Human beings are naturally good, and the civilization we built is a corrupting swindle. In Rousseau's vision of the distant past, humans lived as solitary creatures in the state of nature. They were guided by only two instincts, a desire for self-preservation and a natural pity for the suffering of others. The trouble began when people started living close together. Proximity bred a new form of self-regard Rousseau called amour-propre. It was a toxic pride that depended entirely on how you ranked against your neighbor. People stopped asking, "Do I have enough?" and started asking, "Do I have more than my neighbor?" That single question made accumulation a measure of human worth. Eventually, someone planted a fence in the ground, declared, "This is mine," and everyone else was foolish enough to believe him. Property became a new line between the haves and the have-nots. Laws and institutions were then written specifically to enforce that line, protecting what the rich had claimed for themselves. Rousseau used the state of nature as a thought experiment rather than a destination. It served to prove that since our current civilization is a corrupt fabrication, we possess the power to engineer a completely new, legitimate political order from its wreckage. His solution arrived in 1762 with The Social Contract. It opens with the famous line, "Man is born free, and everywhere he is in chains." Rousseau rejected the divine right of kings entirely. He stated that the only legitimate basis for political power is a mutual agreement among free and equal individuals. He called this the general will, the choice the community makes when citizens set aside private advantage for the common good. This creates a unique psychological loop. Citizens who obey it are obeying a law they gave themselves. Rousseau had redefined the concept of liberty. In his machine, submission to the collective state is actually the ultimate form of self-rule. But this machine hits a wall the moment human nature kicks in. What happens to the individuals who inevitably disagree with the general will? Rousseau answered with a phrase that has haunted his legacy ever since. Anyone who refuses to obey the general will shall be forced to be free. Under this logic, dissenters are viewed as free riders who benefit from the contract without complying with its rules. This framing justifies the community's right to compel compliance. Fast forward 27 years to 1789. Robespierre weaponized this exact philosophy during the French Revolution, invoking the general will to justify mass executions. The theoretical machinery was easily co-opted. If the general will is always right, any faction that claims to represent it can label their opponents as enemies of the people. By demanding perfect collective agreement, Rousseau's engine of ultimate freedom became the primary justification for the Reign of Terror. Writing in the bloody aftermath of the Revolution, Benjamin Constant sought to diagnose the structural error in Rousseau's code. Constant identified two distinct concepts of freedom. The first was the liberty of the ancients. Citizens in Athens or Sparta voted on laws and wars together, but the state rigidly controlled religion, marriage, and speech. Nothing was private. The second concept was the liberty of the moderns. This protects what no authority can touch, the individual's right to their own beliefs, associations, and the simple right to be left alone. Constant's diagnosis was that Rousseau had imported the totalitarian ancient model into a modern world built on individual rights. Granting a collective, unlimited authority over the individual, even in the name of a democratic vote, creates an inevitable pathway to tyranny. This creates a modern danger. The general will requires a unified people, meaning whoever holds power gets to define who belongs and who is excluded. In apartheid South Africa, A white minority operated democratic institutions among themselves while excluding the black majority from the franchise entirely. For those outside the definition, the general will was a locked door. Even established democracies like the United States intentionally distort the collective voice. Systems like the Senate or the Electoral College allow a minority of the population to exert control over the general will of the majority. This mechanism of defining the people culminated in the 1930s. Hitler rose to power through elections, invoking the Volk with the same absolute confidence Robespierre used to invoke the nation. We are left with two colliding principles. Rousseau would argue that freedom means living under laws you participated in creating, even on the days you lose the vote. Constant would argue that no democratic process can authorize the violation of individual rights. A majority that strips a minority of its liberty is still a tyrant, regardless of how they voted. This remains our unresolved paradox. When a legitimate democratic process produces an unjust result, which philosopher is right?